What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some 2024 impressions of Fallout 4. For a few different reasons, but mostly because it's next up on my list of older games to go back through and replay. Now, technically speaking, I have reviewed this game before. In fact, I 100%ed it years ago, but my review for it was like one of the very first videos I've ever made, and truth be told, calling it a review is probably a little on the generous side. And now that that is pretty much what I do, I figured it's time to go back and revisit this particular game. If you've watched the channel recently, you may just know that Fallout 4 is one of those games that kind of inspired me creatively, especially in terms of YouTube content. But it's certainly a game that is a bit contentious in its overall appeal. Now, broadly speaking, I think Fallout 4 is a good game. However, it does have some pretty glaring flaws. I'm not a huge fan of the story, and it's pretty well known how the dialogue isn't exactly great, with most of it always leading to the same place anyway, no matter what you do, the lack of things like skill checks, etc. And yet, in spite of that, sometimes it can still offer you really profound stuff, like, the entire Far Harbor DLC. But long story short on that introduction, it's time for me to give this one a proper review, especially on the back of the TV show earlier this year on top of the next-gen update that hit PC as well, also earlier this year. And I want to see how this game is doing now, after that, but also to freshen up that original review that was one of my first videos all the way back in like 2015. Because honestly, it would be kind of nice to see somebody watch a Fallout 4 video from me that doesn't make me cringe. Now, first things first, as always with basically any Bethesda title, we've got to talk about mods. As this is a review, I'm not going to be using any, really. There is some Creation Club stuff that I believe I have enabled. I've never actually bought any of those for Fallout 4, but sometimes they give them away for free, and then occasionally they just gift you credits for some stuff. I'm not exactly sure what they were for, really, but there were thousands here, so I bought this stuff that looked interesting. But other than that, no real mods or anything. Mods are great, obviously. You can, of course, change the entire experience with those mods, and I would say no small part of the next-gen update's very negative initial reception is due to it breaking a lot of people's mods, as updates many years after the fact tend to do. But in spite of that, the next-gen update for it is pretty noticeable looks-wise. While I wouldn't say this is an incredibly visually compelling game or anything, it does look substantially better than I remember it, which is kind of nice to see at the very least. And then there is, of course, the rest of it. So let's kick it off with the stuff that I already know I don't really like, and that's the main story primarily. Now, I like the beginning of the story where you start out in the pre-war era before winding up in cryostasis before popping out 200 years later to get the game started. That whole intro sequence is pretty solid. I think you probably could have used a little more time with Sean and Nora, if you're playing as Nate anyway, in order to establish a connection between you and your child to, make you want to go find him more afterwards when he gets kidnapped while you're in cryostasis. But for the most part, it's a pretty solid introduction. But it goes downhill pretty quickly for a few different reasons for me. For starters, I would say that Fallout 4, in terms of its narrative, outside of some pretty niche areas, it really is afraid of letting you commit to a choice. It's constantly trying to make sure that you have a back avenue or a very clear path to getting basically everything you want in every situation. Because Fallout 4's story goes on to branch between the 4 different factions throughout the area that you can then potentially side with and do missions for. However, the script absolutely breaks its own back trying to make sure that you never actually have to commit to these factions until the very end of the game. And I really think that's probably the biggest problem. If you were to rewrite some of that, I think the story would have been received a bit better. But to me, the problem has always simply been that a lot of these factions just simply need to take no for an answer on this one and let you deal with the consequences of those things, which would lead to more, I think, diverse playthroughs for starters, but also let you feel like you're actually making a decision in terms of that story. Which is a situation obviously not helped along by the fact that the dialogue wheel in this game is underwhelming, to say the least. And then there's the changes they made to progression, of course, since the previous games where they swapped out skills and things for the perk chart. Now, this is a tough one for me, because on one hand, I actually really do like a lot of what the perk chart has to offer. I think it offers a ton of build variety and allows you to customize a character really, really intently. However, that came at the cost of course, gutting the skills and traits and things like that to make a character feel more unique instead of being able to potentially just level up and reach a point where you can sort of max everything out if you play long enough. Though I believe the technical max level for this one is like 62,000 or some nonsense. So I don't really see a lot of people actually hitting that, but you can get to a point where you basically have everything in terms of the perk chart anyway. And I think it would have done better if they had made more use of perk-related skill choices. There are actually a couple here and there, but they're few and far between, and they're definitely sorely missed here, for me at least. But I would say the flip side of that is the gameplay, especially of Fallout 4, feels pretty great. The way the legendary system works for things like weapons, so you can pick up weapons with special effects from major enemies, and that's all kind of random, so you can get a potentially really fantastic weapon with all these different mods that changes the way you play. You can also upgrade and customize weapons and stuff to your heart's content, which is a really fantastic system. And that's just little pieces of what makes playing Fallout 4 feel fantastic. And while, as a result of that, it is pretty easy, actually, to ignore the VATS system if you want to, VATS is still there and honestly one of the most effective ways to play the game, especially with the changes they made to criticals here. And that doesn't even mention the settlement system and all these other little side systems that make Fallout 4 what it is. But for the sake of this video, and to keep it from running on too long, since mostly what I wanted to do here was simply set the stage, I've always enjoyed Fallout 4. My problems with it were basically the problems most people had. I think the story was underwhelming, and I do think there was some stuff lost in the translation between the old skill system and the new perk system, on top of the dialogue wheel changes and the voice protagonist. A lot of which I think would be solved if they would simply let you commit to one of the factions earlier on, rather than watch the game try to bend over backwards to accommodate absolutely everything. Like, just let the character make a decision and have to live with the consequences, and I think you would fix a lot of my gripes with this game, and honestly probably many others. And yet, in spite of that, Fallout 4 is still a ton of fun to actually play. The weapons feel great, the perk chart allows a whole host of different approaches to combat, lets you specialize in on all this sort of stuff. They still do a fantastic job with things like environmental storytelling, and for all of those reasons, really, I think it'll be fun to run back through this game properly, taking into account things like the new upgrades and stuff that have been made to it, and while also updating an incredibly old video of mine, which will be fun for me at the very least. So, all in all, I would say, if any of that sounds interesting to you, certainly hang out and subscribe, and hopefully check out some other videos while you're at it, because I don't expect to get this one done right away. I'm going to play this pretty leisurely over the course of the next couple of weeks, as there are still a couple of new releases left in December for the year before I wind up finishing out this one. So I'm not exactly in any rush here, especially since I already 100% this a long time ago. So ultimately, am I going to tell you anything you probably haven't heard about Fallout 4 in some form or fashion before? Probably not. But this time you'll get to hear it in my voice, and if that's not compelling to you, I don't know what we're doing here. And that is going to do it for today. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.